This is the way it feels to move through summer in Lululemon. Iconic Align softness without the front seam. For our smoothest look and feel ever, summer won't know what hit it. Stretch your limits in the non-stop flexibility of the new Lululemon Align No-Line Pant in select stores and at Lululemon.com.
You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mireille Siné. I live in Los Angeles, California. I'm originally from Cameroon. That's where my family's from. And while I am an athlete and a runner and a coach, I still consider myself a multi-hyphenate. Try not to box myself into one thing, but throughout this life, trying to explore all that I can be and all that I can do.
Yes, this episode features the running story of Mireille Siné, who is a marathon and ultra runner. She's a coach and much, much more. And intertwined into Mireille's running journey is an autoimmune condition she has been navigating since college. And she's going to tell you the whole story. But before you hear more from Mireille, I want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of this podcast. And I am so happy that you are here. Mireille's story is powerful. It is full of resilience and determination. And yeah, I am really happy that you are here to listen to it. So let's dive in. Since childhood, Mireille Siné has been an athlete. She's been active in sports, and that has included running. There was no particular time when she started out as a runner that she remembers, but running became a much more central part of her athletic journey during her college years, and ever since. Now in her mid-30s, Mireille has completed numerous half marathons. She has stopped counting. She has run over a dozen marathons, the most recent of which was the 2024 Chicago Marathon, and you're going to hear her mention that in her story. She has also run trail ultras, and she has run two really interesting events. One is the Speed Project. That is a roughly 340-mile relay event that goes between Santa Monica, California, and Las Vegas, Nevada. Mireille also ran with a group of women from Boston to New York City, and they completed that 200-mile journey in 11 days. This is all to say that Mireille loves the challenge of running long distances, and she has for years. But like I mentioned, Mireille has also been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. She was diagnosed with lupus in her last couple of years of college, and this has been something she has navigated ever since. It has had an impact on shaping her life as well as her running journey. Now, before Mireille tells her story, there is one detail I do want to clarify. She talks about running around the pyramid in Long Beach, and she is talking about the Walter Pyramid. It is at Long Beach State. It's an athletic arena, a very recognizable structure that, yes, is a pyramid. And she talks about running around the outside of the pyramid. And for context, one lap around the pyramid is roughly the same distance as a lap of a standard outdoor track, which is 400 meters or about a quarter mile. All right. So let's get into it. Let's hear Mireille Siné's running journey. And she is going to begin her story. It's during the summer while she was still in college. This is before she was diagnosed with lupus, and she was just starting to notice that her health wasn't quite right. Here to tell her story is Mireille Siné.
Things started around a summer where I was taking summer classes. And my first little inkling that something was off was I was walking out of my apartment at the time. This isn't in Long Beach. I went to Cal State Long Beach, and I was holding like my mug of coffee, which was warm as you would expect, but my hands never felt warm. Even as I was kind of standing in the sun, and yeah, it's a sort of like a windy day, what have you. But I'm just like, I just took note of it, right? It didn't seem like a big thing at the time, but I was like, wow, my fingers are actually like really cold as I'm holding this very warm beverage, right? I go throughout the summer taking this course. 2 months later, I visit home to see my mom to get my hair done. She's been taking care of me in that way for years, and so I wear braids, so I'm not normally in my natural hair. So when I have to unbraid to rebraid, that's when we can sort of see the state that my hair is in. And as my mom was unbraiding, she noted that I had some hair fall out in the back. Again, that's something that I would really know until we were at that moment. So now I've got, sort of like this body temperature issue. I've lost some hair, but I still generally feel quote unquote okay. And it wasn't until the start of that next school year where things started to really start to feel a little bit off as far as like I started experiencing some joint pain, particularly in the mornings where I woke up stiff. Like I woke up with like my fists clenched, my knees would hurt, elbows hurt, all these different things. And it would literally take about 20 minutes to work up the strength to get out of bed. And then I think like, oh, okay, I got out of bed, I've showered, I'm ready to go to campus, all that stuff. And things would feel good for a couple of hours. And then I'd be walking around campus and then it felt like I was walking through cement, like my feet would start to swell. I could barely like lift them up. I was just so tired trying to get from one end to the other. And that was just so unlike me. Right. Cause again, I'm working out, I'm running at this time. So I can't imagine what's going on. In retrospect, it can seem like things went from 0 to 100 really quick, but it actually took me, I think, about a year and a half to have an official diagnosis. And in that year and a half, unbeknownst to me, I had developed a blood clot that would later go on to obstruct blood flow to my hand. I still dealing with like trouble sleeping and joint pain, brain fogginess. I'm losing a lot of weight. And the odd thing was because people knew that I like to work out. So they thought I was just working out, going really hard in the gym. And I was just like, no, I'm actually like pretty sick right now. And I say this with a laugh, but that's like such a common thing for folks to like equate, skinniness with health. And in my case, it was like, no, this is not a good thing. I'm losing weight way too fast because my body is trying to fight this thing. And so a year later, I'm again taking some summer courses. And at this time, things were much, much worse, right? I had a hard time, again, going back to that body temperature thing. I was constantly cold, even in warmer weather. Since I had that blood clot, which I didn't know was a blood clot at the time, some of my fingers had started to turn black from the lack of blood flow. So I started wearing a glove to try and hide that. And I would periodically take myself to the ER when things felt particularly painful and hard. But I was turned away for the first couple of times. I was like, I don't know what it's going to take for y'all to know that I'm sick. And, throughout this time, I've gone to community clinics. I've gotten so many, blood draws here and there. My first quote unquote diagnosis was juvenile arthritis because of the joint pain that I had. But once that subsided a little bit, it's kind of like back to the drawing board. And my first inkling that it might be lupus, but they were unsure, was one of the blood tests at a community clinic, right? And I didn't take that to heart at the time because, they weren't telling me something conclusive. So I kept going, trying to live life as normal as I could, trying to finish up the school because it was getting to the point where I would have to file for graduation. And I didn't know what that would look like at the time. And one fateful evening, this is back in the summer of 2012, I take myself to the ER again after a particularly bad time trying to sit still and focus in this evening course. And I show them my hand that I had gloved up. And I think seeing the progression of what my fingers looked like was what really alerted the people in the ER that something was off. So I sat in the ER waiting to be admitted. Eventually was taken to the back, and they had to do some quick assessments of my fingers, figure out any infections and things like that. And then I was basically waiting for a bed in the ICU, and I didn't know why we were jumping to the ICU so quickly. But I guess I was like, oh, this is got to be pretty serious if they're waiting for an ICU bed. So I'm sitting there in the back. My dad comes to wait with me, and he brings me some food. And I'm just so cold back there. It's a hospital, so it's naturally cold, but I'm frigid. And then I remember just like, he had bought me some Jack in the Box to eat, and I remember just breaking down and crying as I was trying to eat these fries. I hadn't eaten in hours. I had no idea what was going on. I was just like, it was just the one moment where I felt like everything was sort of like falling apart as I'm eating these soggy fries. So eventually that was a night that I was admitted. And then that's when things really started to turn around with like seeing an actual rheumatologist, having an actual diagnosis, having an actual treatment plan. Definitely in those last couple of months prior to being admitted, I wasn't doing much physical activity. Earlier this year, I think I looked back at my very, very old like Nike login, and I could see the pattern of like how actively I went to just like maybe running 10 miles in a month. So there's no physical activity at the time of diagnosis. And because of my treatment plan, I had to wait to get clearance to actually work out. I did chemotherapy for six months intravenously, 2 months on the pill. I wasn't getting my period at this time at all. And so I had to wait so the first part was like getting through the chemo, because lupus is a systematic autoimmune condition, which means it can go anywhere. So their approach was just like, well, we'll just flush everything to try and get, the best results. And a callback to the blood clot that I had was I was also put on a blood thinner medication. And so it was it was a little dangerous for me to kind of hop into exercise as we're like calibrating all these new medications. So I'm going in for check-ins, I'm going in for treatments and things like that. So 8 months in, we stopped the chemo. I'm still getting treatment for the blood clot, which has now been alleviated, but there's just some things you have to do with medication. A year goes by. I'm starting to feel a little bit better. I'm regaining some of the weight that I lost, but my energy isn't still quite there. So I took a semester off of school. I took the fall semester off, came back in spring. And from that moment on, it was just like my whole orientation was towards like actually graduating, actually like getting my degree. And because of all this, my graduation was delayed by another year, right? So I'm in the space of just like, I'm stressed out because I'm not getting as much financial aid. So I'm trying to figure out like, how do I like make money and make myself better and actually graduate? And so a year goes by, I have a check-in, things are moving in the right direction. A few more months go by. My period actually starts, which for me was a sign that, I am regaining that sort of health. And that's when I decided to ask my doctors, like, okay, this is, what we've worked on. This is where I am. What do you think about going back to the gym or doing some cardio? And he was all for it. The only thing was that I wasn't given a lot of guidance as to what I could do and the level I could do it at. So it was basically trial and error for me, just going back to some group fitness classes and managing or adjusting things as I could. But in relation to running, because I had been running and I loved running so much by that time, the stark reminder of how hard it is to start over didn't occur to me until I tried to run around. We have this structure called the pyramid in Long Beach. If you've ever seen it, it's like a giant blue pyramid, right? And I was just like, let me see if I can just do one loop around this pyramid. I got maybe a quarter of the way through and my legs are just like, what is going on? It burned so much. And I had like no idea how long this stuff would last. But I can even run that whole lap without stopping. Like I would go for a little bit and I would have to walk. My legs would swell up. I get super itchy, super tired. And I don't know what convinced me in that moment to just keep going, because yeah, anybody else might have just been like, okay, maybe this is not the time to run. But it was the most easily accessible thing to me. I wasn't like thinking about any races at the time. I just really wanted to get out and move my body. And I'm sort of like thinking ahead of like, when I graduate, what am I going to have available to me? I'm not going to have the school gym, I'm not going to have all these different sports facilities. So I should get back to something that I've done before and I know how to do. And so those first few months of running were extremely humbling and extremely frustrating at the same time. The fatigue element, there is such a thing as like autoimmune fatigue or lupus fatigue, which can, the longer you have to deal with it, the more you can sort of tell like what's normal and what's not for you in particular. And then, yes, I'm also getting used to new medications. I'm getting not just new medications, I'm getting used to the fact that I have to be on medications for life, basically. And everything's hitting me as like, this young, I'm like 23 now. And I've just, the mental shift of what I thought my life was going to be and adjusting to how it really is now was sort of just like another mental barrier to go through. It's just like, yes, I'm young and I'm quote unquote like, in remission now and somewhat healthy, but it's just like I'm not things are just not the way that I imagined. So like taking the medications and trying to be more intuitive, I guess I'd say, with my body and learning how I react to things differently, like in this post lupus stage, was probably half the battle, because I was afraid of like, doing too much and taking myself out by like, getting too sick or getting too stressed. So finding that balance of, yes, I'm going back to running, but how many days a week is it safe for me to do so? Strength training, how many days a week is it safe for me to do so? Nutrition wise, I had some nutrition restrictions in the beginning because of the blood clotting medications. So that's something else that I had to work through. So just relearning how to live life is basically what it was all about. But I think at the same time, I was particularly drawn to running solo. I think half of that is because, no one else would have to see me suffer this way. But it also gave me time to myself where I could just try and do something for myself. And it felt a little bit rebellious at the time too, to sort of say, I'm still going to go out and do this thing that's, supposedly that's supposed to be really hard for me. And it was at the time, but it just felt like I needed to have control of something because so many other things were now out of my control at that time. In that time, I think with so much going on and being such a young person and new to living in the adult world, it's just like, it was really hard to figure out like how do I like put things in priority order, for lack of a better phrase. It's like, there's way too many things I would say for a young person to handle. And then you put a diagnosis on top of that. It can definitely feel like the weight of the world is on you. But for running, I'd say it gave me a chance to get out of that mode for a little bit. And it was also a way to measure progress for my own health, right? Like I could do all the blood draws. I could, go to the doctors and listen to what they said. And not that they were like, terrible people, but I also felt like running was a tangible way to actually measure progress and regaining of health at the time. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons why I stuck through it, because if I went from not being able to run, a quarter of a loop without stopping, and then a month later I could do half a loop without stopping, then that would tell me that, hey, there's like something's going on, like something is starting to work or to get back in order. So while I was still living in Long Beach, I was scrolling Instagram one day and I saw some friends of mine who I knew were also runners. They were posting pictures of like these big group runs and group workouts and things like that. And I was super curious about it. So I sent them a message. And at the time, Nike had a Nike Run Club and their strength training component like within Los Angeles. They were the ones doing like weekly group runs and training sessions and things like that. So when I graduated from Long Beach, I moved back up to Los Angeles, and I started signing up for these runs. And at the time, I'm not saying I was fully back to running. I certainly wasn't. I was still sort of struggling on these 3 and 5 mile routes. But again, I was using that group environment as motivation. And I think just having that component of being around other people who are at all these different levels and running for all these different reasons helped to show me a different side of running. When I started hearing conversations about folks who were doing things like 10Ks and half marathons and all these races, I was just like, I have no idea how you can run a half marathon on the weekend and be okay, because I am struggling with this 5K. And eventually, like when I was able to do like a double digit run, I would be out for the rest of the day. It was not, there was just this, my mind just could not fathom doing a half or a marathon. And so one day I was just like, well, I guess I should probably try. And I would not have had these thoughts if I was not surrounded by other people who just made it seem like just something anybody could do. You know, I think this is definitely a part where like your environment definitely plays a role in your own development and your goals and as a person. And if I weren't around those people who were so dedicated to their own training and their own life, their own training, their own goals, I don't know if I would have had the thought or the insight to push myself just a little bit more. This is also my first time in any sort of organized like running situation where I'm learning about like speed work and easy runs and long runs and things like that and strength training. So I think all those components together just sort of like really clicked for me. And I'd say like the discipline that it took to actually stick to a training program, the structure that it gave me, I mean, I love that part so much. Like even till this day, I love the training process. It's what keeps me coming back, because it gives you a sense, it gives you an opportunity to really figure out like what dials you in, like what is actually important for you in this moment of time. Like could things change for the better, or like what things do you need to tweak? And I think having that structure at the time, again, I'm out of school at this time. I'm figuring out what those next steps are, but I'm also trying to regain sort of like the structure for myself, because I didn't know what that looked like in the time of just trying to be healthy. But now that I'm a little bit removed from that, I think experiencing the structure of training and a program and setting these goals kind of it gave me a bit of purpose. It's definitely like something to orient towards, because in order to run as well as I could, I also had to, make sure I was sleeping well and make sure I was eating well and hydrating. So all these different things that are part of someone's health and wellness, but is not really talked about on the medical side, where it's more so like, kind of take these medications and maintain. So for the first time, I felt like I was sort of getting like the other half of health and recovery. My first marathon was a Los Angeles marathon in 2017, which is so special because my dad, it used to have a bike component as well for folks that know the history of the race. And so early on when we moved here to Los Angeles, my dad used to really like to bike. And so there are a couple of years where he did the bike version of the marathon. And one year he took my brother and out on our little bikes and we sort of followed him around for a little bit. So that was like my first exposure to an endurance event, even though I have no idea if my young mind called it that at some point. But I already had this history with like the LA Marathon as an event and as an organization, and sort of seeing just how important it was for the city. And having like been around some runners and people from different run clubs, like it was like the talk of the town, like folks were always getting geared up to run this particular race because it was the hometown race. And so I'd started running with a group called Blacklist LA. It's like one of the oldest run clubs here in Los Angeles. They happen to be, I believe, training partners with the marathon organization. So they were just like one of the highlighted groups where folks can go and train. And I decided, so I trained with them partially for my first half marathon. I got 2 hours and 30 and I was tired, but I did it. And then I did, in my second half marathon, I did a 2:16. And for me to like see that jump, I was just like, oh, okay, something's going on, like something's happening. So I had met great people from Blacklist LA, and I knew they were putting this training plan together. And my motivation for training for that first marathon was to prove to myself that I was really in remission. Because there was medical remission, right? All your blood tests are starting to come back, pretty good, relatively normal for whatever normal is for you then. But from what I had learned about the marathon training process and everything that it takes going into it, I thought that if I could take my body through that, then I really was okay. And I really was like, quote, on the other side. So the whole process was just to take things as they came, but also be like disciplined, adhere to that structure and see what happened. It was a smooth cycle for the most part. I had some hiccups. Like medically, I think I woke up and my face was like puffy one time. I can't remember why, but all these little things that, yes, could have stopped me, but I was just so determined to get to that start line and then get to that finish line. And so I'm having a blast in this training cycle. So much so that I registered for a second marathon later that year without even running the first, because I was like, this is going great. Like, what could go wrong? So we're like halfway through this cycle, and I registered for Long Beach because I was like, I'm going to go back to the place where it all started and, really finish this thing. So LA Marathon's going great. We get to race weekend. I'm really going for it because it's your first marathon. So yes, I have a time goal. I think I won at 4:30 at that time. And I was there. I was very much in it, but I was also having fun at the same time. At mile 16, I get double quad cramps. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? I had never experienced cramps in training. So I'm really at a loss for words. A friend of mine runs by, checks up on me, and then we keep going. Things are fine. The cramps work themselves out. A handful of miles later, the cramps progress, and I believe they're like all down my leg. And so now I'm really worried. So out of a huge sense of precaution, I go into a med tent. They like worked on my legs a little bit, made sure I was hydrated. I stayed in that tent for about 20 minutes. I was looking at my watch the whole time because I was deciding, do I keep going or is this the end? Like, I didn't want to push so far that I would be hurt longer or get back to being sick. But after 20 minutes, the cramps subsided and I decided to just kind of go back out there. And I really tried to make the rest of that race count. I think I was in the med tent at mile 20 or 21. So very, very close to the finish line. And I just wanted to get it done. So I wouldn't call it a run. I would call it maybe a hobble of some sort with occasional sprinting to get to that finish line. And of course, some of the cramps start to come back. I'm trying to like push them away and kind of just listen to the music that I had in my headphones, trying to engage with like the crowds and things like that. And once you make that turn, this is the original LA Marathon, not the original, but the Stadium to the Sea course where we used to finish in Santa Monica. So there was a point in this race where you are cresting over towards your final downhill and you can see the ocean ahead of you and you just have one more turn to the left and you can see the finish line. So I'm playing this all out in my head as I'm approaching these specific points. And then I finally make that left turn and I can see the finish arch and I just start going. I did not care how much pain I was in. I was like, I'm finishing this thing. And the first thought through my mind as I crossed that finish line was just like, I can do anything. Like that moment was just absolutely everything for me. When they say like, you never forget your first finish line, so true, so true. And I was just like in disbelief. I was proud, but also in disbelief at what I had just endured. I think my finish time was 4 hours and 56 minutes. So I made it just under 5. And I was just like, wow, Jesus. Yeah, I loved it so much. I was a bit off, but to finish under 5 for my first and hadn't gone through everything I'd gone through. So this is 2017. At that point, I had been diagnosed in 2012. So we're 5 years later. And I've just like, if you'd see me at the peak of my lupus, where like, when I got out the hospital, my mom had to help me walk out the hospital. She had to help me bathe and cook my food when I got home. So being to that level of just like weakness is really what I would call it, to be able to literally climb your way back up to run your first marathon. I mean, I don't know how else you can describe it except you do what you gotta do sometimes. I think the more I did endurance sports, it actually kind of taught me to advocate for myself more when I went to go see my doctors. Even in the process of, I mentioned I had to use a blood thinner medication because of the blood clots. And that was an example of something that I felt I was put on for too long. And I think if I didn't have like this built up self-confidence, I wouldn't have had the courage to like go to my doctor and like have that conversation about, making these changes, whether it was getting off a med or changing a dosage, things like that. So definitely like in the process of training, I've also started to look for ways to take lupus, quote unquote, in my own hands, right? And to not push back as in like be an adversary, but to learn more, read more, just so I can advocate better when I am at the doctor's office. So I can say things that like, hey, my sleep isn't going so great. Can we do something about that? Or, hey, I'm actually, training for something. So maybe this is why some of my labs might look this way, right? Because they sort of they're not taking in consideration the life you're living outside of their office. You really have to tell them that like, sometimes these are elevated because it's a reaction to training and not because of something with the lupus. So we really need to learn how to blend these two together so that I can have the best of both worlds. And so, yeah, that's something that I've done definitely in the past handful of years, is to just like figure out how to get more in tune with myself, especially as training does get intense, noticing those little signs between like what is a normal level of fatigue for me and when do I actually need to pull back a little bit. Even with like something as simple as training volume, right? I've tried to play around with different things to feel like what actually feels sustainable, in addition to like the cross training and the strength training and just all the things you have to work. And being a human in the world, like what does that balance sort of look like for me? And I think in this era where I currently am, where I'm a little bit older from what I started. So like priorities are a little bit different. Training is a little bit different. I try not to pin myself against, my 27-year-old self, who had less responsibilities and definitely more energy, and training could do like a 50-mile week, 60-mile week, and sort of relearning that as I change, how lupus shows up for me will also change. So I have to be ready to change in accordance to that. There was a period in 2022 to like the top of 24 where I did experience like a bit of a big lupus flare. Yeah, I'd say that flare up is the whole reason why I am who I am today, because it was the catalyst for so many things. It actually started out with me getting diagnosed with COVID, I believe in May of 2022. I was working a very stressful job. Even after the COVID subsided, I still didn't feel quite right. And I knew I was dealing with a lot of stress and burnout from my job. So I took a medical leave for that summer of 22, just to sort of figure out like, okay, maybe I just need a break and some time to calm down. And at the same time, I had already been playing with the idea of coaching, of starting a coaching business. So I also used that time to sort of put some feelers out there to see if anyone would want to work with me. Like, how do I actually start a business? So it was very much like it felt like a do or die moment, because I know I didn't want to go back to that previous life I had. And I needed work, or I needed a job that let me also take care of my life because one thing I really hated was like, basically asking permission to go to the doctor's office. And for someone like me who has very regular doctor's visits, that gets really annoying and just time consuming to have to to take the time off or figure out PTO and things like that. I was like, no, I'm done with that. I want to be able to run when I can and to go to the doctors in the time that works for me and all that stuff. So the summer goes by, and it wasn't until I do a check-in with my rheumatologist that my labs start to look a little off. And they had noticed that my inflammation markers were a little bit higher. White cell count was a little bit lower. And, the lab sort of confirmed what I had been feeling, which was a bit of like malaise, I would feel. And I started noticing that difference in the way running felt. It did feel like a callback to those early days where I would, try to go around the block and just, get some inflammation or swelling. And so that was sort of my ticking point that something was off, was the fact that I couldn't run the way that I used to after building up so much fitness. And so that sort of started the journey of trying to get healthy again, in the sense that because I'd left that job, I also now had to navigate health insurance or lack of health insurance and getting put back on a plan and finding those doctors again. So it was about a few months of that before I was able to get really settled in with the rheumatologist and be back on medication. But the flare has sort of gone on for a while, where it would also take a while for things to go back to normal. And while it wasn't full blown, like it was in the beginning of my, when I was first diagnosed, it was also the most significant shift in lupus appearing in my body that it had in my adult life. So just being able to sort of realize that things can go really, really well for a long time, but they can also turn really bad at a moment's notice, even if I feel like I'm doing everything right. So that was sort of the first lesson for me, was that, just be prepared for something like this. And it's not necessarily something that I caused in myself. It's just, my immune system is getting a little confused and it's reacting in this ways. And the best thing I can do is kind of honor that and take care of it the best that I can. But that was sort of the catalyst for me to just to start coaching, so that I could have some more time freedom, so I could attend to my health in my own time. And the big shift that happened with me with running was navigating through my own runner's identity. At the time, I didn't realize how attached I'd become. Truly didn't realize how strongly I had identified with that word and with that activity. I never thought it to be harmful in any way, but when I couldn't do it at the level that I knew that I could, something really just switched in me, and I didn't know how to handle it at first. In retrospect, what I should have done is to just take a break. But I was so in it, and I felt like I had something to prove. And I felt like I had this responsibility to showcase that I could still do this thing, even though in the background things are going really haywire and I don't quite have it all together. And it took me a good solid 2 years before I realized that wow, I really needed to go through that in order to let go of that identity and to really just sort of run in a way that makes sense for me, and not worry about how it looks to other people. So that flare lasted for about 1.5 years. And I would say at the beginning of 2024 is when I started to sort of feel my running and training self start to come back. My paces were all over the pace. I was much slower than I was used to. So that was also something to psychologically go through, and just having the discipline to go back to step one, build slowly, work with a coach just so I could have someone else kind of figure out the structure for me and really start to, I guess, set the groundwork for where I wanted to go, even though I didn't quite know where that was then. But after that last marathon in Chicago of last year, that's when I was really just okay, it's time to do things differently. And I think I really need to listen to all the lessons that I've learned in the past 2 years. And that's what takes me to this moment now, where after that marathon, I took a good 2 months sort of break. I was still running, but definitely not as much as I was before. I was doing more cross training and really just trying to love movement again, because running had been so hard that I wasn't looking forward to it as much as I used to. And so from that break and coming into 2025, I put myself back in that beginner's mind of like, in order to run that first marathon, I first had to have that base. And I think there's a part in some runners where like, if you've done something so well for so long, the thought of like starting over or doing less than what you're used to can feel really daunting. But for me, that's exactly what I had to do. And going back to square one and building a base, setting intentional time to actually base build with no sort of like frills about it. And it was in that base building that I started to feel like, okay, like we're healthy, we're pacing well, we're back into that structure. And I can feel like excitement at the opportunity to actually race against myself, which is not a feeling that I had when I had that flare up. My emotions around running were definitely just like, let's just get through this. But now I'm like in the state of, I want to see how good I can be again.
Mireille will have the opportunity to explore what's possible with her running today and challenge herself once again at the marathon distance. She is registered for the Every Woman's Marathon, which is taking place in November of this year, 2025, in Scottsdale, Arizona. And that does bring us to the end of Mireille Siné's story on the podcast. Thank you so much, Mireille, for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. I really, really appreciate it. And I wish you the very, very best in everything that is to come. Now, of course, you can keep up with Mireille. She is on social media. Her Instagram handle is Hey Coach Mireille. She also has a website. I will provide the links to both of those in the show notes. And that does bring us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate you coming here and listening to these stories. And I always appreciate when you share this podcast with somebody else who you know will enjoy these stories too. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next Tuesday, I do wish you healthy, joyful, resilient strides forward.
Women's running. Women's running stories.